If we haven't inculcated a love of the game when they're young, then we're going to have problems later on. But yes, certainly if we're teaching kids what you had said, Wally, if we're going to help kids at the age of 12, where the kid thinks I'm a star and I expect to have all this ice and I expect everything, and that's what's happening, then yeah, they grow up and they expect it because they've had it all the way along. So, it's a balancing act. It really is. Coaching is an art form, and we've got to engage everyone and challenge everyone, and it's an art form. That's all I can say about it.
We've got a lot of minor hockey people on board. Al Ramsay, I'd like you to introduce yourself with Saul here. Al's in Massachusetts, and he's been brought up in a hockey world in Prince Edward Island with one of the best developmental programs, and now he's in looking after minor hockey at the U10 level or maybe lower in Massachusetts. Al, any comments? And please introduce yourself to Saul.
Sure. So Saul, I'm I guess the hockey director for a youth hockey association. It's a nonprofit town hockey, everything from house league to travel, 8U, 10U, 12U, 14U. But I think you really hit the nail on the head. I think it is important for them to learn to compete, and sometimes competing means you win, sometimes you lose. And I think we can start having. Well, I know. Because we've seen it, but you can have those conversations with little kids. You just have to make it relatable, and you have to make it so that we're going to go out and we're going to do our best, and we're going to compete, and we're going to play hard, and sometimes we're going to win and we're going to feel great about that, and sometimes we're going to lose and it's not going to feel very good. Mm-hmm. And what do you do, right? Like, you can either choose to get upset or be frustrated or angry, or you can choose to learn from it and shake the other guy's hand or give him a high five and move on and come back and, try to work on something in practice to make yourself better. Like, we can have those conversations with kids that are 4 and 5 years old, and we do. Mm-hmm. I've seen it with other coaches as well. I think, honestly, I think there's other sports that do a much better job at that than I've seen in hockey. Like, I've spoken a couple of times about, my kids doing martial arts, and I learned so much watching those guys that are black belts teaching little kids. Like, they're really, really, they're experts at that, right? Like, they're totally experts at mindset. Bringing together groups of 4 and 5 year old kids and sitting them down in a circle where they all sit up straight and they're all totally engaged and they're all listening to, somebody talk about, what does it mean to go against somebody and lose or get smacked in the face and it hurts a little bit, and how do you handle that? How do you deal with that? How do you process it? Right. And how does that translate into, how you carry yourself at school or, with mom and dad or with your siblings or with your friends? And, they do a really excellent job with that. So, there's no reason why we can't do that with 4 and 5 year old kids right on up to junior level and beyond. So
I'd have a question for you, and that is, with some of these travel teams, these are, kids, say, I don't know, 11, 12, 10, 11, 12 on travel teams where the parents are paying significant amounts of money. And some of these academy teams, it's the same. I think that kind of creates a context that sort of breeds, well, I've invested all this and my kid should be getting more ice. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't think you had to be in a academy to experience that. I've seen that with, just above house league, right? With a C-level team where you encounter that. So I think it's important to engage the parents so that they understand this. Like, the tough part about what we do is that we're separated from the parents, right? There's literally like a wall of glass between us and the parents. They can't necessarily hear what we're saying to the kids, and they may not be in the dressing room when we're having these conversations. But
I'd say thank goodness to that.
Yeah, in some cases, but there's a benefit too. Like, I've been in other situations where you can hear the coach speaking and hear what he's saying, and the parents are aligned with the coach's message. So it's really important, I think, to have those conversations with parents. That's part of the parent meeting, right? Mm-hmm. And we do cover that. And we introduce these topics with the parents right from the very first day when the kids are on the ice. we have that presentation. This is one of the elements that we talk about, and we try to get it across. Now, it doesn't mean that it never pops up. We've had instances where we've had to deal with parents through the season, where we've had parent meetings midway through the season, and we've had to readdress the same topic. But the more you have those conversations, the better I think it gets.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Okay. I've got to move on to another meeting, Wally, if that's okay.
No problem. I've got some questions for the people. Saul, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yep. Join us again anytime, and we'll appreciate having you on. And I'm sure that whatever the topic is, and somebody will have a question, because the area you're working in is more important than the technical side. And I'm really glad we're having these conversations at other levels. And I'm looking forward to, having you on again and finding out more about some of those players growing up like Morris and what they went through in the system back then to get to where they did in their careers and now in their lives. So thanks very much, Saul.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Take care. Okay. Al, thanks very much for that perspective. I'm just blown away by Saul's, his holistic approach in terms of seeing everything. I initially, I have to admit, I was concerned that he had a pro hockey kind of connection, but I see a minor hockey connection that he's had to deal with, where I'm glad, Al, you spoke and brought up that's where we start dealing with those kinds of things. So, Sammy, have you got any comments on what's transpired so far relative to your position in female hockey as a mom, manager, coach, whatever?
Well, I love hearing from Dr. Miller anytime he has an opportunity to speak. And I know that this conversation has sort of revolved around women's hockey. So thank you to the men that are in minor in boys hockey that have appeased us for this conversation. But hopefully some of it has benefited. I think, part of the conversations that I've been having over the last couple of days was to not think about gender as a male female construct, that it is fluid, right? So within every team you coach, there's everybody on the spectrum, and that goes for both men's and women's hockey, and being cognizant of that, and treating the athlete as the individual that they are, and not necessarily coming in with these preconceived notions about how you should coach men or how you should coach women. And so as much as it is difficult at times to coach what is perceived to be a woman's team, I think for men and for boys that are growing up that are maybe fluidly more closer to the middle of the scale, it is tough for them to endure what is perceived to be a men's hockey coach too. So being cognizant of that, I think that was really a point that we talked about the last month at this course that I'm taking in business. Is we had half of the cohort was military. So my teammates were all ex-Navy SEALs and Green Berets, which was incredible. I mean, it was an amazing, amazing experience. And we had a presentation by a fighter pilot who was a woman. She talked a lot about grit and how she had to have this to overcome it and to persevere. But some of the older women on the conversation talked about how we also grew up with that mentality of chauvinism because it was ingrained in us. It was pushed on us that women couldn't do this. So we had to take on the male persona to be able to push forward. And that was perceived to be of value. And so in the women's game, often we are judged, beside our male cohorts. And the ones that are sort of brought to the highest level are men that have perhaps played or women that have played in men's sport, or women that have coached in men's sport, or the Jana Heffords of the world that simply played women's hockey are forgotten until it comes time to evaluate who goes into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Or somebody like Kim, who has dedicated her life to coaching women, doesn't get the same accolades that somebody that perhaps coaches a female that coaches men. It makes headlines in the newspapers. But what Kim has done is, to me, far greater. So I guess remembering that gender is fluid, and that within both genders, there is always a middle and two opposite ends of the spectrum. So I love that, hearing from Saul and all of your conversation. And so that's my 2 cents. Thanks, Wally.
Sammy, I really go back to my involvement with female hockey and accidentally falling into it. And it's just in total keeping with, the societal shift that's going on. And I think sports in general are an opportunity, not just with, gender equality and recognition and respect, but the impact of sport and what it's intended to do is sort of what we're all here for. We want to make the game better and contribute to it. And I think everything that everybody's, had to say has been super, super good. So, Richard, I'm just curious about what's going through your mind and your role. And I know you had mentioned something earlier that had come up on a text, and I mentioned Saul was on. Maybe you want to bring something up in that regard.
Thanks. It was about what the OMHA just put on its website about the role of a mentor. And I urge, rather than my telling everybody about it, you should have a look at the main page. Let me just get it on my iPad here. If you go to omha.net, and on its main page, it's got the 8 steps of coach selections, which, the topic itself is important, and the content there is good, but it starts off with the association mentor position. And I don't know who wrote that or came up with it, with the ideas, but what a mentor does and what a hockey director does, like what Kim is doing or what I'm doing, hockey director or technical coordinator, whatever you want to call it, is very different from what the mentor does. They've got things like evaluating coaches and stuff like that, and it's completely wrong. Completely wrong. Like I go back to the early days of Hockey Canada's meetings on mentorship that I remember going with Paul Carson and all those guys and having these little breakout sessions about what mentoring is about, which I've known from the teaching world and from the coaching world, and having mentors evaluate coaches and sit in on coach interviews and picking coaches. It's not the message we should be sending at all. I have no idea where that came from, but you should look at it. Some of the stuff is obviously valuable to associations about, how to put together committees, but a mentor is, I'm going to go to Kim if I want to be mentored on how to run, the kinds of things that she's doing with her girls, and she could mentor me on how I should do it with my association. But I'm not going to go evaluate Kim, and Kim 7 out of 10 on that drill. Nah, Okay, Kim, 9 out of 10 on that drill. That's so.
Well, that's the business.
Sorry.
The business of hockey is all about evaluation and results. That's disconnect here rather than the process, and that's really the essence of it. That just trying to do things better and do it the right way for development in the long term. I think that's a big picture thinking, and I can check it out, but I know what I'm going to see, because it's typical of all the resources were provided in a piecemeal fashion. And until you deal with the base of why you're doing what you're doing, you really don't know how you're going to do it, and they haven't figured that out. So it's the values thing.
It's a
Matt,
very different topic. That's how.
yeah. Matt, anything from Saul's thoughts and Tom, and anybody else who hasn't had a chance to speak in? Bob, go ahead, anybody.
I've chatted a couple times. I'll let someone else go if they want. I've always got thoughts.
For those of you that don't know, Bob and I worked with Dave King in Japan many years ago, prior to Nagano, and we sort of had the same Hockey Canada certification, training, development, Richard, that you're familiar with, and we've been able to experience working with Dave. But Bob's, coached major junior hockey and very high levels, but he really has a common philosophy, doing things the right way. Bob, any comments on everything you've heard?
My philosophy on like teaching kids to compete and to grow within the game is like when they're younger, you have to let them play, but you have to let them know that they have to give effort in order to be rewarded in ice time. I don't think that you have a kid play 6 minutes and another kid play 20 because he's a better player or a lesser player. I think they should all play as equal as possible, but there should be a set of guidelines set out early and reinforced through the year that effort is what rewards the ice time. Whether you play good or bad or indifferent, if you're giving your best effort at your level, then you should be rewarded to play. And that's how kids are going to learn to play the game, and that's how they're going to learn some life skills. And I maintain that any sport, and hockey is actually a really good one, is the best way for kids to learn life skills. And I think as a coach, you have to reinforce life skills in your teaching. And as they get older, obviously there's more things that you incorporate in there. You don't start talking to an 8-year-old kid about the relationships he's going to build with his boss when he goes to work, right? But you can when when you get into that 15, 16, 17-year-old group, you need to relate like teamwork and what it means in the work environment or what it means in a marriage or whatever. And I think that we don't. Coaches go to the rink and they run drills. They don't correct. They don't reinforce. They don't use any of what they do as a teaching moment for life skills. And I think that, to me, is where most of our coaches are missing the boat. I mean, do I want to win? Yes. Do I enjoy losing? No. Do I celebrate losing? I'm not sure what you meant by that, Wally. I learn from losing. I don't know that I celebrate losing. You'd have to explain that to me a little bit. But I think we have to teach kids that it's going to hurt when you lose and it's going to feel good when you win, and you learn from winning and you learn from losing. And it's not always the outcome you want. I'll incorporate some of that stuff into the coaches' programs so that they learn to relate these life skills to the kids. And I mean, everybody's going to do it a different way, but I think that needs to be part of the program somehow, and I'm not exactly sure how. I think the better coaches just naturally do it. It just kind of organically happens, I guess, but it's more than X's and O's to me. And I think if you go in there's a lot of coaches have the idea that if I win, I can move up the ladder to a higher level as a coach. And that is a wrong attitude to coach with. I think you really have to coach with, I'm here to help these kids be as good as they can be, because that's what you want to do, not because you want to coach in the NHL. It's because you want them to have success both in their sport and in their chosen walk of life as they move forward. And I think you always have more success that way. I mean, they want to know that you care more about them than what they care, right? You gotta, like, every kid is important, and every kid's family is important, and it's coaching is not a 1 hour a day job. You got to be available to them at any time, and you have to be a role model, whether you want to be a role model. And or not, I think your actions have to be consistent with what you're expecting from your team, whether it's on the ice or off the ice. And I think that we need to get more of that message through to the coaches. And I think the kids would have more fun, the coaches would have more fun, and I think you'd eliminate a whole lot of problems that you have with parents. And I have never had parent problems. I'll be honest. I can tell you the amount of times I've had to have a conversation with a unhappy parent. It's maybe two, and they were so minor it wasn't even worth mentioning, really. But you just treat people the way you want to be treated, and that's a big part of the game to me.
Well, Bob, I just want to interject because I never had problems with parents as long as I coached school sports. And I had more problems acting as a hired mentor, paid mentor, being evaluated, being brought in to protect the coach. But I've had more problems coaching female hockey. And with all that was going on behind the scenes that was affecting kids in a bad way. And so it's something that does exist out there. And
it exists. Well, you'll know who these two guys were because you've been around them. But when I was coaching at the midget AAA level, the one parent problem I had was two parents that would be in the stands fighting amongst each other about whose kid was the better player, and your son was being, because I played them on the same line. Your son's selfish, he won't pass me the puck. Your son's this, he won't do that, and it was so distracting to the team. I actually had the assistant coach take over the bench. This was in Maxwell Arena. I left the bench. I went up in the stands and I told the parents, I said, you go to one end of the rink, you go to the other end of the rink, and if I see you two standing up here arguing a game, distracting our team, your two boys will be sent to the dressing room. That was the end of the parent problem.
Yeah.
Two best players, not only on our team, probably in the province. And their parents were just nuts. Yeah. Totally nuts.
Well, I've seen female side, I've seen something, not two dads bragging about their sons in the stands, but I've seen a player, female player, midget age player, say something I would never say to anybody, say to a coach in the dressing room between periods of a game. Disrespectful feedback and behavior. So, the reality of what you're saying, Bob, that happens in the guy's side, but Sammy, it's happening in the girls' side out in Calgary recently. So we may have our ducks in a row. I don't know. Kim may have hers in a row, but the hockey world, and Al, you're trying to make sure yours ducks stay in order in your environment, but you're going to be learning a lot moving forward as you go up the ladder, and I'm sure glad you are where you're at. Any observations, Al or Kim?
Yeah, I had an observation on what Bob said, is that I think that takes a tremendous amount of confidence as a coach to stand up and do that. And I would do the same thing. And I'm not sure that the 13 years ago version of Kim would do the same thing. I think, unfortunately, as Richard alluded to earlier, with the amount of accepted movement in girls hockey, I do see a lot of coaches get held hostage by their best players and worried that if they don't cater to them in some respect, that player will leave, because again, there's no residency rules. And so I have seen that pattern, not with myself personally, but I have seen it with many coaches, that they seem to have a different set of rules for the quote unquote best players because they don't want to lose them. They don't care about the third liners. If they go to another association, big deal. But I do think sometimes coaches wear, the velvet gloves with the players and the parents of the elite, because of that fear of them leaving or wanting to go somewhere else. So that's more what I've seen here. But to Bob's point, I would do the exact same thing, and I have done the exact same thing during a game. And I've done it with my team during a game. I remember once we were playing a team that in midget, it was one of the teams that like cheered every time like someone on your team got hurt. Like that is lovely. And we were playing them in playoffs, and it was best of 3 game series, and it was getting heated because they were the association around the corner. And at the end of the second period, before we went out for the flood, the girls were jostling with each other, and you could see them saying something, or I don't know what was said because I don't need to know exactly what was said. But I went into the room after. I said, if you guys continue to if we continue to act like this is not how we act. I said, if I see it again, we'll be leaving. We'll just leave. Like you can't act like that. And they all looked at me like petrified. I said, if they want to do it, they want to push you around, and that's what they want to be jerks. Like, so be it. But that's not the culture we're gonna have. And apparently, all these girls went. I have this reputation of giving rousing speeches. I'm not sure where they come from, but I gave this speech that kind of put them in line, and the players were all telling their parents about it afterwards, and because the parents, of course, are getting heated too in this tiny Toronto rink. But you have to be willing to stand up with the parents, and you have to be willing to stand up with your players and show them where the line is. And we're not going over this line. And I think it's very powerful there to use the word we and not you. But again, most coaches I see, especially the younger female coaches who haven't quite figured out how to deal with the players and the parents in a group scenario, they just let the best players, quote unquote, run all over them. And I think they run into huge issues because of that.
Well, I'd like to relate a story to that. If you give in to the demands of these players, or you don't, and they leave, are they not just going to run into the same problems down the road again with somebody else? So we had a player that we owned his rights. We wanted him to play for us. He made demands of me as to what he was going to do as a 16-year-old. And I told him no, he wasn't, that he'd have to earn his way through the team. He was demanding to be a captain of the team at 16, coming into a team that I've got drafted NHL players on, and he was demanding to be the captain as a first-year 16-year-old. And I told him no, and I explained to him why not. Well, then he wanted to be the assistant captain, and I said no, and I explained to him why not. And I said, like, we always have a younger player as a captain, but he's a 17 or an 18-year-old, but he has to earn his way and his respect. Anyhow, long story short, he wouldn't come and play for us. We traded his rights to another team. Same problem there. They didn't give in to his demands. They traded his rights to a third team. So he played in the Alberta Junior Hockey League for a year, and then he went to the third team that he got traded to. Didn't like that they didn't make him the captain halfway through the year, like they kind of told him they would. So he left, and he ended up going back to AJHL, I think. And then the next year he played. No, I got this wrong. He went to college first. Didn't like what was happening at college, NC2A school. Left there. Got drafted when he was there by an NHL team. Good player. You'd all know who he was if I told you who he was. Anyways, left there, went to junior. Halfway through the junior year, decided to turn pro because they gave him a big signing bonus. He went, played on that contract. When that contract was up, he demanded another huge bonus, which the team wouldn't give him, and he sat out for a year. He did have a decent career, but you've done nothing. This kid never learned from the time. And his dad, very wealthy man. I didn't understand the whole situation. I mean, the kid just went from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. They demanded that the older brother play on a team who wasn't a very good player. It's just stuff that you can't give into. You have to be true to yourself, and you have to. What am I? Word I'm trying to find here, but like you can't have these elite, so-called elite players deciding what they're going to do and when they're going to do it, because the whole hockey program breaks down there.
Yeah, Bob, I think we all understand that. Daryl Sutter understands that. Kim,
Yeah.
the idea of consistency and staying by your philosophy is what we're talking about here. And it's got to do with parenting and education and establishing a standard of acceptable behavior. And I think, that story, I could repeat 2 or 3 of them very similarly.
Yep.
And Kim, I don't know at what point you realized you had to draw a line in the sand for accepting behavior, not accepting behavior, but the line in the sand, and that's where if Saul was on, in our conversation about Daryl Sutter, who he initially in our conversation, he didn't quite get the positive messaging that I was having about Sutter and what he was doing because they hadn't won games. They weren't getting results. And I said, well, the point is, what was he trying to do is establish a culture that needs to exist to be successful. And if you renege on your standards of behavior, and those coaches get fired sooner than later.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they want to keep their jobs, they give in, and so they tippy-toe around coaching ethics. And in female hockey, in the situations I've encountered, exactly that. Players demanded more ice time, and the philosophy of everybody doing everything the first half and earning your roles in the second, but having a role, which Saul mentioned, boy, that exists at the college level and should exist at the major junior level, not from the get-go. And that's what you were doing. When a 16-year-old comes up to you and wants to be a captain, that problem occurred when he was in novice hockey.
No doubt.
Yeah. Al, what do you think moving forward? With you're going up to U10, U12s, you're faced with travel competition and recruiting now?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I really fell in line with that. My recruiting philosophy was, well, we'll see who shows up at tryouts and we'll make them better. But I don't know if that's really recruiting. No, I think this is this whole conversation today is a really important one, right? Like I think we as coaches have a really important role to play. Probably now it's more important than it ever has been. Like I think I don't know what the right way to say this is, but some of the things that these kids are getting exposed to and like the way that things are dealt with in school and that today, just like I can speak from our own experience here, like if you have a birthday, for example, you can't invite anybody or you have to invite everybody because they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and
Right.
nobody gets a failing grade, right? They don't even get numbers or letters. They get, descriptions of like their performance, right? Like they're so scared to hurt people's feelings that they avoid the sandpaper, or they avoid the difficult conversations, the things that make people uncomfortable, it seems. And on the other side, you have this ultra competitive, stuff that's happening in youth sports, where it's like to be as a good coach, where you got to find the balance, right? Like you got to expose kids to things that are uncomfortable and difficult, and help them try and navigate those things, teach them things, right? And you got to do it in a way that, kids when they're little still get the chance to play. They get an opportunity to learn those lessons and they're not forced out, and they learn to love it, right? So it's like, from my perspective, it's a difficult job, and it's a really important one right now. I really enjoyed this whole conversation. I think it's great.
Is this one of the reasons why mental health issues are coming more to the fore than ever before? Because kids have never learned to deal with problems or disappointment or failure as a kid, and then as they get to be teenagers
if we haven't inculcated a love of the game when they're young, then we're going to have problems later on. But yes, certainly if we're teaching kids what you had said, Wally, if we're going to help kids at the age of 12, where the kid thinks I'm a star and I expect to have all this ice and I expect everything, and that's what's happening, then yeah, they grow up and they expect it because they've had it all the way along. So, it's a balancing act. It really is. Coaching is an art form, and we've got to engage everyone and challenge everyone, and it's an art form. That's all I can say about it.